Welcome to the Brooklyn Podcast with yours truly, Anthony Puccio, my co-host, Colin Helwig, and founder of Floor and Ceiling on YouTube and Substack, also a Nets reporter for On SI, Wilko Martínez-Cachero. Wilko, how are we feeling? The Nets have the number 8 pick. We got 1 week until the draft. How are you feeling? Anyone in particular that you're keeping an eye on? What do you got for us?
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, Pooch, thanks for having me on. Colin, same goes for you. Yeah, man, I'm excited for the draft. I think that a lot of stuff is going to go down potentially, not necessarily over the next week, potentially maybe on draft night itself, but I do think that there might be a lot of movement. The Nets are very well positioned to kind of be at the center of it potentially. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of stuff going on with the Nets. I think that everyone right now is kind of focusing on Ace Bailey for good reason. Um, I can understand, the links to the Nets. I think that from his perspective, it could make a lot of sense, but I'm not so sold on it, from the team point of view.
When you say team point of view, like you mean strictly the Nets?
Well, yeah, I mean, not just strictly the Nets, but, I think that with the Nets, I sort of feel as though the theory that's going around and like it makes sense would be that they've promised that they're going to draft Ace, at 8 or whenever. But I don't really think that most NBA teams, especially if you're drafting, at number 8 to start with, would feel very comfortable making a promise like that relatively late in the draft. Also, in Brooklyn's case in particular, I think that the roster and just the organization as a whole still has so many moving pieces that you might start with the number 8 pick, but potentially you trade up, you trade down. Maybe, who knows, in a scenario that plays out, you're not even picking anyone in this draft. So I just don't know that they would promise Ace, or if they would, I'm not sure that's the best decision.
Yeah, Ace is an interesting guy. I know for going into the draft this year, and every Nets fan ever since they've traded Mikal Bridges has been looking forward to next week because they knew what the season coming up was going to be like, and they knew that they spent they prioritized the long term instead of the immediate, and now this is the beginning of the long term. The long term has become the immediate. We're here, and Ace is one of those guys that, if you are the casual fan and you're not watching a whole lot of college ball, but you just see the shot making and you see the highlights, it's like, wow, this guy's like a difference maker. And I'll confess, and Pooch and I have talked about this offline. We're very much locked in with like the Nets and what's going on with them, and we also both have like day jobs too, so we're not as tuned into college ball, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to have you on today, Wilko, because I know you've done a lot of breakdowns and stuff. I especially was a fan of the Noah Song breakdown because I think he is one of the most like that guy is so big and so quick, but there's so many different kind of like elements to his game and things that he has to work on. But to bring it back to Ace, though, I mean, I'll tell you though, like from someone again, like just like I haven't watched a whole lot. Like he's still an exciting watch. At least that's how I'm taking it. And I think with where the Nets are at, they got so many picks, and obviously you want to nail every pick, but I'm at least of the mindset where I think I like a guy who maybe I don't really know that I want a guy who's going to raise the floor immediately for them, like a Khan, who's like a guy that is just like such a good like complementary piece. I would like someone who can raise their ceiling maybe in a couple years. Now, I know there are concerns about Ace, but do you think that he could still, there's a world where he could be that guy for them?
Yeah, I think so.
You
I
can
think
say no if you don't think so.
No, I think so. I think so, but it will just depend on his buy-in, really. And like with the Nets, really, I almost feel like it's a similar situation to Cam Thomas, where you can kind of make the argument that, his best role or his most optimized role or whatnot might be, getting less touches, acting more as a movement shooter, as a catch and shoot guy, not necessarily ever being the primary ball handler. Not to say that he has been that during the Nets, during his tenure with the Nets, I should say. But I see calls for it, like let's see Cam Thomas at the point guard, things like that. But I actually feel as though his best role could potentially be slightly more off the ball. I think ultimately, that's sort of the question with Ace is that He's a ridiculously tough shot maker, like you're saying, Colin. And his highlights are super fun. And like, don't get me wrong, he's super, super talented for sure. Um, I think it's about how he channels that. And I think that to start off his NBA career, if you want him to be efficient, if you want him to develop, I think, the best habits for his long term future, then I almost feel like he should be looking at it rather than, wanting to be the star right off the bat. I think it's fine to come in like a Jason Tatum or a Brandon Ingram who comes in, slightly behind other players, but still gets plenty of chances to show off his talent.
See, for me, like I'm thinking about the risk and reward. Like we're hearing and we're basing everything on reports, right? Like we don't know too much. Jonathan Givney is is one of the most credible, if not the most credible, draft reporters out there, and he's saying that he's losing momentum. You have Keith Pompey of the Philadelphia Inquirer saying that scouts are saying he's immature during like whatever it is that he's doing right now. That he's not fully bought in. And then in Pompey's reporting, he also said that if he does lock in and mature, he can be a Hall of Fame caliber player. So I'm kind of like just reading the tea leaves and just seeing what is and what isn't, and it's really hard to get a grasp. But the Nets have visited Rutgers so many times, be it for Dylan Harper or be it for Ace Bailey. I'm sure they were out there looking at both of those guys, and I don't think they would have wasted their time, so much time that's been reported, uh, going to Rutgers if they didn't have some level of intrigue. But I'm just trying to get a grasp with Ace because he clearly has the skill set to be someone very special in this league. But what's being reported is quite the opposite of what the Nets seem to prioritize in their organization, right? Like we hear so much about character, and I'm not saying that a 19-year-old kid needs to be acting like an age veteran, but I think this is important to them. Like I think they really do take these intangible character traits in these players. They take that very seriously when they're drafting these guys. So me personally, just as a reporter, as a fan, like whatever it might be, if you can get Ace Bailey, you go get Ace Bailey. But that's just like the impulsive side of me. I don't see what's going on behind closed doors. I don't know what's going on other than what's being reported right now. And unfortunately, it seems like he's slipping. This reminds me of Jared Allen, even who was in the lottery or mocked in the lottery a couple, 5, 6 years ago, and he fell all the way down to Brooklyn in the late teens because scouts and pundits were saying that he didn't love the game, right? That there was a
They said that about Anthony Edwards too. There were murmurs about it.
right, and kind of segueing off of that, like maybe I shouldn't put too much stock into the intangible things if the Nets were willing to take a Jared Allen type, where they're saying he doesn't love the game. Clearly, he loves the game enough to be an all-star in this league. So I'm getting two different reads on it, but I think if I'm the Nets, I mean, and you have an opportunity to get this guy, you go and get him. Would you agree, Wilco?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you all the way. I think, I'm a big proponent that, especially after you get to a certain point in the draft, you sort of just go with the best player available. So if Ace is there at number 8, there's a very high chance that he is the best player available. And it's not like he wouldn't fit the Nets. You know what I mean? Like everyone would fit the Nets right now, really, because I think it's kind of a, completely blank slate. Um, with Ace's character, I think that it's sort of an interesting question to talk about because, I think that like throughout most of the season, and I've gone and watched Rutgers a few times in person as well. I'm not in the locker room or anything, but just based off the way that he would, be in huddles and in warm-ups and things like that, really seems like Ace, got along very well with his coaching staff, with his teammates. Seems like a very fun-loving guy. I think that any questions about his feel are strictly like on the court, be that, can he remember a play? Does he know where to be on defense? Because sometimes you would watch Rutgers and his teammates would be telling him, this is actually who you're guarding. This is actually who you're supposed to be on. So it's like little things like that, little details, which are super important in the NBA, and they kind of sum up over the course of a single game. But I do think that, like, with Ace, he'll love basketball. It doesn't really seem as though he's like a huge fan of anything else. Um, it's also important to remember that even if you're not working this guy out, nothing forbids you from just going ahead and drafting him if you like him. There was a point a few years ago, well, about a decade ago now, actually, but the Sixers drafted, Nerlens Noel, Jahlil Okafor, Joel Embiid. They didn't work out any of those guys, and they still drafted them very high up. So, I mean, there's no limitations there.
Yeah, I mean, when you draft a guy, they're still a movable asset right after the fact. I wouldn't be shocked if the Sixers say, "All right, we'll pick Ace so that everyone can be like, all right, he's off the board and we got him. Now let's hear what do you want for him? Like we'll trade him now, and he's traded right after he's picked because everyone can maybe just feel out the situation a little bit more. Those 3 through 10 picks, it seems like no one really knows what's going to happen. But on his just one thing on his like personality type, and I think you guys kind of hinted at it too. But he's 19 years old, and I saw a report one time where someone was saying he's like immature, but like not for a 19-year-old. Like maybe he's like goofing off and like dancing around and like cuddles and stuff, but it's like he's a kid. Like let the kid be a kid. So I don't let that stuff bother me as much. My favorite movie is Moneyball, and they were talking about old guys and like, oh, he's old, we don't want him. Oh, but look at his like skills, and the old scouts were too worried about him being old, and that's why David Justice I'm referring to, like, oh, that's why we shouldn't have him. I feel the same way about guys when we're talking about a teenager here. Like if he's really damn good at putting the ball through the hoop, I'm not going to let him be in a little childish be the thing that turns me away. And I hope the
Yeah,
Nets feel that way.
I'm with you, and like especially when you take into account how much potential he has. I don't think that there's anything really in his background that would be considered a massive red flag. I mean, I've seen the reports about his agent wanting to get paid for on-camera interviews, and obviously that's not a great look. But at the same time, like Ace is not the one doing it. He's never been, caught up in any sort of situation, be that like at school or on his team or, taking it further, like legally as well. So I think that part of it, is the optics, which are not great. Part of it, I have a feeling, is that his representation really has a desire right now to kind of control the draft conversation, just a few days before the draft. And then I'm sure part of it as well is just that he would probably rather go to a certain team than probably, the Sixers or it's been reported the Jazz, but I don't quite believe that.
I'm
Go
just
ahead, Push.
wondering if it like do the Nets trade down for this guy? Like I keep wondering, like if it's two,
You
three
mean trade
spots,
up?
do they? Sorry, trade up. I apologize. Yeah,
Okay.
they trade up for him. Is he worth trading up for? Again, the risk reward factor. I'm still like
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah, that's where we talked about this last week. That's where you might lose me because I don't. It depends how many assets you're giving up. Like that's what I'd be like. Hey, I said what I said. Like he's a kid, and like I the upside like intrigues me, but at the same time, it's I understand his handle's not too great. I understand that his playmaking is not too great. Like those are tangible concerns, and those are
Yeah,
the risks. So it depends on how much you're moving up to move up.
yeah.
Yeah,
It
that's
it,
that on
it
Ace.
really shouldn't be underestimated how much influence these agents have on. He's 19 years old. Like if Jeff Goodman and people that are reputable in this industry are saying like he's receiving bad advice, it's kind of out of his control. That's not him doing that. That's his representation telling him maybe what you should or shouldn't do. These are consequences and repercussions. You might slide, but you lose a lot of money with that. Now, how much do agents like? How much stock do we put into also having a bad agent or having somebody that's giving bad advice that could impede on your development, right? Like, let's say in a hypothetical sense that the Nets do draft this guy, but his agent is a real pain in the ass, and he's he's bothering Sean Marks and is really impeding on their development process, right? Or is upset if Ace isn't getting the minutes or starting minutes and things of that nature. Like, I don't know if I'm necessarily asking anything more than just venting that these, like, we often forget that these are still kids being resented by grown ass men or women. And sometimes, and in some cases, these agents, they get a power surge and lose these kids more money, which subsequently then trickles into their NBA career. Not always, but sometimes will trickle into their NBA career. And I keep looking at the Nets front office and trying to think it from their perspective. Like, this seems like a massive headache, no matter how good the kid is. It seems like a lot.
Yeah,
So
I think like with the Nets, they'll really be looking at his family, his agent, of course. Just to give a little bit of background, his agent used to well, he's Sharif Cooper's dad. Sharif
yeah,
Cooper was drafted a few years ago. He plays in France now. And, Sharif's dad, he used to run the Athletes of Tomorrow AAU program in Georgia, which is what Ace played for. He reps Isaac Okoro as well, who comes from the same AAU in high school as Ace. So it's a pretty like in the family or like kind of hometownish sort of vibe that's going on there. I think that like I've sort of seen it speculated on Twitter and Pooch. To your point, I think that you're spot on in that agent behavior can affect the player, even if the player himself doesn't have any huge personality concerns. But I think that in this case, it does sort of feel as though Ace is pretty well aligned, with what his representation wants, or at least that they're very close in that way. So it'll be interesting. I think that something else which you touched on, and I think it's unlikely, but it could sort of be used to strong arm your way to your team, is that if the Sixers draft you at number 3, you can just tell Daryl Morey, like, hey, I'm not going to sign this contract unless you trade me to wherever I want to go. But that's a very risky strategy because you're depending on a bunch of people, outside of yourself.
Hey, Daryl Morey, I heard that you were a liar, so I from a source, so I never want to be a part of an organization that you are a part of. That's what he could say.
Something
I
like
love that
that.
we're already referencing James Harden, of course, but no, I love that we're already worried about Ace Bailey's agent causing a ruckus at the Barclays Center.
it's been so many hypotheticals, and I know it's a name that's excited Nets world, but again, how realistic is it? What is the risk reward? This is something that we're just here chatting about. We'll find out more in a week. I do want to talk about a name that's come up a ton. Jeremiah Fears. I have a couple of questions on him, but I do want to point out he did an interview and he said the basic stuff. I really like New York. I had worked out with the Nets, and everything went great. They told me how it fit in their system, et cetera, et cetera. The basic stuff. From my perspective, I've been on the show with Colin, and we were talking about potential sleepers months ago. I thought he was a sleeper. Granted, I also thought the Nets were picking in the top 5. I didn't think they were going to be down at number 8. So now that they're at 8, I see they're trying to find that diamond in the rough potentially. We're hearing his name more and more. I don't know what to believe and what not to, but I do think it's problematic for somebody who's a 6'4" guard, Witchers, now that they do barefoot measurements. He's 6'2" without, but relatively small to average size guard who can hit the 3 ball on a team that shoots a lot of threes. Wilko, I'm curious for your perspective, and Colin, yours after. Do you see him being a fit in Brooklyn? Like, if he's at 8, if he's there at 8, do the Brooklyn Nets absolutely have to get this guy? Like, is he a lock that should be considered a sleeper or a diamond in the rough, or are we kind of just reading too much into this?
Um, I wouldn't go so far as to say that they have to pick him if he's there at 8, but I would definitely consider it. Like, I think, starting with sort of the concerns that you brought up, Pooch, he's definitely not very efficient right now. both in terms of his shooting and his passing. Like his process, I think, is usually pretty good with the reads that he makes and, how he can break down a defense or how quick he is getting into the paint, things like that. But, obviously at the end of the day, he has to either make the shot or get the assist rather than turn the ball over. So there's a little bit of a struggle there. Um, I do think at the same time, he's very young. He's one of the youngest guys in the draft. He was actually supposed to be wrapping up his high school season right now, but he ended up reclassifying to play for Oklahoma this past season. So, for example, like, at the start of the draft cycle, I also highlighted him as a sleeper around like November, December, something like that. I said that, hey, this guy can dribble, pass, and shoot. He's super young, pretty explosive, not strong, but he's explosive. Probably like a lottery pick, maybe. And I'm still sort of around that range. I think maybe more so like right after the top 10 is where I'll end up with Jeremiah Fears. Not because there's anything that I particularly dislike about his game, but I do think that he'll take a little bit of time to come around. He's not super versatile in terms of like, I think that he can really only be an on ball guard. I think he can only defend point guards. And sure, like Jordi Fernandez, I think is awesome at coaching point guards or ball handlers in general. But with the Nets, you also have to be thinking about the longer term. So, like with 2026, right? If you're able to get, not to go too far into the future, but Cam Boozer or AJ DeBonsa, someone like that, or even, if you get Giannis right now, he wouldn't really be a seamless fit next to somebody else who probably needs the ball more, and I think would probably end up being a better player.
Yeah. I mean, looking at fit right now, I feel like asking any prospect if they fit with the Nets, that's like asking if like a pebble will fit in like an Olympic size swimming pool. Like the Nets are, you said it before, Wilco, like they're a completely blank slate. So it's, I just think, there should be no one on the roster where you look at a draft prospect and you're like, no, we can't have him because he's here already. The Nets of the future will most likely look very different than the Nets of the current. Now, speaking on fears, covering basketball, playing basketball, me personally, a quick first step where you can get past the line of defense on your own is one of those things where I think that's just one of the most impressive things, one of the hardest things you can do in the game. So I'm not as informed as some of the other guys on fears, but like I've seen like some of his tape, and I just think you talked about it, Jordi Fernandez and point guards. It seems to be like a point guard kind of coach, and we saw he was able to turn Keon Johnson into a rotation player, and so I'm confident that he, Fears has that really tough thing, that speed that you just can't teach speed. So, but I think you can teach him. You can learn to polish that shot over years, and he's got the hard thing done. And then I'm confident, I guess, in the Nets coaching staff to build him out into a more complete point guard. And because he doesn't shoot a lot of threes now, and the Nets do shoot a lot of threes, I think that's a good thing because it means the Nets are going to be telling him, shoot a bunch of threes. We don't care if you miss them. We got to develop you. So get those shots up and get better and be awesome in 2 years.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also on that note, real quick, I almost feel as though, just before I forget to touch on this, it will almost be if he goes to the Nets like a continuation of his season at Oklahoma in a way, because I think that he'll still, get as much usage, as much freedom to, get make mistakes or miss shots, get turnovers, things like that next year. So I'm with you. I think that he would get, a bunch of time to develop, and that for him personally, Brooklyn would be an awesome destination.
Yeah, and Wilco, that's a good point regarding like a continuation because the Nets just this past off season reacquired their own 2027, 2026 picks. So he would have this full year to kind of, you know, be patient, develop, get some, show your weaknesses, show your strengths. Um, I think they're in a position where, yeah, they can kind of, I don't want to say waste a year, but utilize this year to accumulate this group of rookies that they did draft with Cam Thomas, assuming he's back, and see what they got, right? And I'm I'm totally with you on drafting the best player available, but I'm also inclined to believe the Nets really do need to draft, whether it be at 8 or sometime during the among the 4 others, that they need to draft a point guard. Like, they have never had success drafting point guards in the past. They haven't really had that key ball handler and playmaker that's a homegrown star. You know, you really look at their last couple, Kyrie and Darren Williams and Jared Jack and Jeremy Lin. Like, these have been guys that have been coming from all over the place. Even Jason Kidd, he was traded to the team. You know, they really don't have any of their own homegrown point guards for whatever it's worth. And to your point about Jordy being able to develop these young guards, I think it would be a win-win, right? In the sense of you're getting potentially the best player available, but you're also prioritizing a positional player that you really need to lead this rebuild in being a point guard. And if you guys have any objections or any comments, please chime in. I'm kind of just venting away here.
No objections. I mean, I'm with you all the way. In fact, like, I'll go even further. I think that if the Nets do not draft a point guard, be it with their 5 picks or, if it comes down to two or 3 picks or whatever, a few NBA GMs have like talked about this idea before, but you should still sign some sort of veteran point guard, be that, someone who went undrafted or someone who's just like an NBA veteran looking for a home for 1 year, something like that. Even if it's like, well, I mean, I don't think Chris Paul would be interested because, he would want a ring. But like that idea of a mentor who can just be the floor general and kind of really set up the team and who can actually, add value in some way to others' development. Because, I think that Jordy was awesome throughout the season for the most part, but something which wasn't really his fault, but towards the end of the year, like you were saying, Colin, Keon Johnson was the point guard. And, after Dennis Schroeder got traded, sure, you ended up getting D'Lo, but he was, injured or, very on and off. So it's like you were really kind of playing without a point guard for most of the season. Um, I think that's fine in a way if you have guys on your roster who you think, can develop some point guard skills, I guess. Like, the Lakers did this with Brandon Ingram, for example, when they drafted him. They just like put him at the point guard at some point. But, I don't really think that there's any long-term upside or much long-term upside in doing that with like a Keon Johnson. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think the Nets need a point guard, be that in the draft, be that after the draft, be that in free agency. But they definitely need somebody who can be a table setter and make life easy.
Yeah, I'm curious if they see that guy kind of being D'Angelo Russell, right? Like,
Yeah. As soon as you
I know.
started describing the veteran point guard to mentor, I was like, oh, the Nets know a guy for that.
Right. At this stage of his career, he would be considered. He's been through the ringer. He's been through it all from draft day to now. So it's an interesting thing to discuss, especially with D'Lo. And can he be a mentor? Is he someone that needs the ball in his hands, et cetera, et cetera? But Wilco, I did want to touch on this. We got D-Rock in the chat right now, and he wanted to ask a question. Which guard is worth drafting to establish the Nets going forward? And I'll kind of add to that. Like, if it isn't Jeremiah Fears, do you have anybody on the top of your mind, point guard specifically?
I think the dream scenario is trading up for Dylan Harper. I think a lot of people would be on board for that. It's probably tough. I think that the Spurs would want a lot in order for somebody to get that number 2 pick from them. I'm not sure that the Nets would make that play, but he would probably be the dream outcome. Outside of him, I think Yegor Demin is a name who I've seen some Nets fans and, NBA fans in general sour on a little bit, but I think that he would be very interesting, especially the further down you get in the draft. If there's a reason, or a chance that he falls outside of the lottery, then, you should definitely target him with that second pick. Um, he's somebody who, is going to be big on the floor, about 6'8", barefoot. So, above 6'9" in shoes. Long, not super long, but he's long and big. I think that there are questions to be asked about his handle, and that's fair. But it's sort of a situation similar to Josh Giddey, in my opinion, where maybe he's not a super creative ball handler, and he doesn't get a ton of highlights with his handle, but he's been playing the point guard throughout his entire career. So I would be surprised if he went into the NBA and suddenly could just not handle the ball at all. At the same time, I think that he's the best passer in the draft. You can use him in multiple ways, and I think it would be interesting to kind of go back and look at how Jordy used Ben Simmons in the half court. Because if Yegor doesn't end up shooting, then you could kind of use him in similar spots around the elbows. On the break, he's bringing the ball up and playing fast. Ideally, he's going to take some spot up threes, which Ben didn't do, but ideally he would have. So he's another name who I think I would keep a close eye on.
We got A Torres in the chat. Shout out A Torres. He says if we take Yegor at 8, we riot. At 19, not bad at all. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little higher on Yegor. I'm looking at my board right now, and he'll be like right towards the end of the lottery for me. But yeah, I mean, at 19, I honestly think that you would probably be ecstatic to get someone of his caliber of talent that late in the draft.
I'm shifting away, and then Colin, I'll let you take the wheel, brother. But I do want to hear Wilko's thoughts on this. Like, not to be all weird, but the other night I had a dream that the Nets drafted Malawach. Like, I don't know why. Maybe it's because me and Colin talk about it so much. I don't know if it's the Brooklyn podcast impeding on my subconscious, but that's what I got. I don't know if I'm clairvoyant or not. What do you think about him? Is he a top 5 pick? Is he a top 10 pick? How does he fit in with the Nets? How does he not?
Yeah, I'm super high on Kaman. I had him as high as number 2 at one point. So yeah, I'm super high on him. I think I'll end up with him either at 2 or 3 on my personal board. But there's a lot to like. I always kind of compare him to DeAndre Ayton, but with sort of a freakishly high motor. Regardless of who you talk to, I think about Kaman Malwatch, be that someone at Duke or, previously with the NBA Academy, or across various settings that he's competed at, everything is always going to come back the same, which is that he's somebody who truly loves basketball. He improves at a really high rate. I've heard stories about him, needing to improve on a certain thing and kind of just going home and going on his phone and just spending hours on YouTube, just kind of trying to like figure out how to get better. And, sometimes in the draft, all of these stories kind of sound cool and enticing, but then you draft the guy and you kind of, figure out that it was just a story. In his case, though, I really do think that, based on the first time that I watched him, which I think was a couple summers ago now in Vegas, until now, the improvement has just been, massively significant. On defense, especially when I first watched him, he's 7'2". He's athletic. He's not super athletic, but he's athletic, really long and tall. So, naturally, he kind of felt like he could get every block. Anytime someone came at him around the rim, he would jump up and try to block the shot. A lot of the time, he would get the block. Sometimes he would sell himself out naturally. But now going all the way to his end of the season at Duke, I think that we're seeing someone who, has really polished his pick and roll skill set on defense to the point where he no longer even needs to leave his feet to get the stop. A lot of people kind of wonder why he doesn't get many blocks. If I'm not mistaken, I think he gets under 1.5 blocks per game at Duke. But to be honest, if you go back and watch the tape, you'll see that he's altering plays. He's stopping shots and drives and actions all the time. Lucas Kaplan, actually, I'm pretty sure that he wrote about this and had some tape as well on Nets Daily a few days ago. So that's worth checking out because I think that he did a really good job at kind of summing up, how he has a safe floor and then the ceiling, if you guys kind of want to get into it as well, it's pretty high. And, going to the Nets could potentially give him a chance to unleash it.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. He had that bad championship game, so I think he's cooked. Nah, that's the propaganda we should push out so that other teams don't pick him when he falls to the Nets. Like, we've been very high on Malawash for a while. I know Pooch especially.
He's been our guy since I think the beginning of tank talks and draft talks. Again, under the assumption that the Nets were going to be picking somewhere between 5 and 6, up until this very day. I personally don't think he falls to 8. You've spoken enough about his upside. I just can't see the team passing that up. But in a dream world where he does land 8 with the Nets, that gives them a lot of flexibility to do things they were probably already going to do already, right? Like, could move Nick Claxton, move that contract. Someone who's seems like he's already halfway out the door already. I don't want to speculate, but Clax has kind of been in and out with the Nets. A lot of people reporting that he's ready to play on a championship contender. I think Day'Ron Sharpe is going to be back next year. So if you do have a Malwatch and Day back front court, it's not bad setting up for the future. But again, it's so difficult to really talk so in depth about this stuff because it's all hypothetical, right? And I think maybe you could attest to this, Wilko, but I don't think he's fallen to 8.
I would be surprised. I would be really surprised if he fell to 8 because I think that he'll be in consideration as high as number 3. So, if it does happen that, he falls to 8, I just put it in the chat, but the Nets should absolutely run to draft him if he's there. Like you're saying, he's a good fit, not just now, but for future pieces as well. He can kind of fit around whoever. His potential on both ends is pretty high, but on defense, I think it's very safe as well, which is important. So, yeah. And then, from a character standpoint, he's going to check all the boxes. The Nets as well, they love a good backstory. So he has, probably, I would say, either the best backstory in the draft or definitely like among the top 3. So many intangibles, great character, really coachable, has adapted awesomely to living in the US for, his very first time actually. Like, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that he's been in the US now for about a year. So, all of this stuff really checks out both, on the court and off the court. And I don't think he'll be there at 8.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want this to happen, but as you guys were talking about him, I was thinking about obviously Joel Embiid's in Philly, and that's their whole franchise. But I think his fit on the Sixers isn't too crazy. Like, I know he's not a power forward, but my personal belief is that why Joel Embiid always struggles in the playoffs is that he's just so exhausted from he's defending the rim, he's rebounding, and he's their entire offensive like hub. And like, you see him in fourth quarters of games in a series when it's playoffs and guys are running harder and diving for every loose ball. Every step, he looks like he's about to just like collapse into like a pile of pudding. And I feel like Jokic has been able to benefit from having a guy who can like a guy like Aaron Gordon, who is a big guy who's down on the block with him, who can take some of those shots, who can rebound, so that he's not doing all the big man stuff. And Joel Embiid's never really had that guy. They tried to make it Al Horford, and Al Horford just like forgot how to play basketball when he put the Philly jersey on. So I don't want it to happen, but I wouldn't be shocked if they just, recognize how much of a stud this guy is and say, we don't want to deal with the potential question mark that is Ace Bailey and just pull the trigger on Colin.
Yeah, I'm with you
Hopefully not.
because Like, he's also, pretty good insurance policy. If Joel Embiid doesn't get back to his best, or, I hope that this isn't the case, but if he just simply cannot, return to even like 50% of what he was, then, you're having the option there at number 3 to kind of draft your center of the future. So either he's backing up, your MVP right now, or potentially he's a building block as well. And, with the Sixers, like, the reason why I think that their draft is so interesting is because even though I generally sort of stick to this best player available theory, I'm not so sure that it's as straightforward with them. Their timeline is sort of on a crunch. Their roster situation as well, I think, is more particular than other teams because, I love Tyrese Maxey, but at the end of the day, he's a small point guard who isn't really going to be a plus on defense. Um, so he's not the easiest to build around. You have Jared McCain as well, who I think, can be a great piece. And eventually, I expect him to be kind of one of the best, 3-point shooters in the NBA. But he's also another guy who's really small and he has short arms as well. And he's not very athletic. So, you have all of these guys who, in my opinion, you should want to, make a part of your future. But at the same time, in today's NBA, you obviously need defense and you need size. So with Malwatch to the Sixers, I almost feel as though he has a chance to bridge both of their timelines, which, obviously is easier said than done, like we kind of saw with the Warriors and some other teams.
Yeah.
But he has a chance to do that. And then he also has a chance to, build for the future and kind of like insulate the pieces that they're using as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle. I like that.
Makes me think of what Jason Kidd said when he was coaching the Nets. Like you can't teach length, right? Like there's other things you could fix. You can't teach length. And he's got a 7'6" wingspan, 9'6" standing reach. You make a good point. Like if you're checking the box score, maybe he's not getting as many blocks as you think he should, but he's impacting every single play. And having someone like that, an interior paint presence like that, can change the entire landscape of a team's defense, and that's something the Nets could definitely use. So, you know, we could play this game all day that we want, but I do want to ask you guys if it's Malo Watch or Ace at 8, they're both there. Who are you taking for the Nets specifically?
I'm probably going to take Malwatch because I think the upside we talk about with Ace also exists for Common. Maybe it's not as like ludicrously high as you like can feel it is sometimes when you watch those Ace Bailey highlights, but it's the Ace's big plus is a high ceiling. Malwatch has enough of that too, where I'm still probably going to pick him.
Yeah, I agree. Same reasoning pretty much. And I'll add as well that I think Common's floor is pretty high as well in a way that, isn't talked about that often because it doesn't make for many highlights or things like that, or even many stats, Pooch, like you kind of said. But, he's very effective. He's super functional, which I think matters a lot. Like, you sort of know what you're going to get from him on a nightly basis. You know that he's going to screen, time and time again. He's going to make multiple efforts. He's going to be on the glass, and like to your point, Colin, about the championship game, I think that his rebounding can still use some improvements for sure. He's not the quickest off his feet sometimes. So, like, maybe he's a little reliant on size, but he's 7'2" with a 9'6" standing reach. Being reliant on size isn't bad. He has some improvements to make, but you can count on him to rebound on both ends, play in the pick and roll a lot, huge catch radius to, get lobs, finish dunks, just finish plays in general. On defense, he's going to try very, very hard. I fully expect him to, I don't know if I'm going to say that he's going to be switchable on a lot of positions, but he's going to check a lot of positions. If he has to switch, a screen late in the shot clock or something like that, like he can definitely stay in front of a guard for 5, 6 seconds. So yeah, I agree. High floor, really high ceiling. Ace maybe has a little bit of a higher ceiling, but his floor is, considerably lower.
I think that it would be a good problem to have if both of them are there. I don't know why, but I think I would probably take Ace and see who else is still available. I think depending on who's still available, I think a couple people made a comment on the side here, but depending on who's still available, maybe you take Ace and you take that flyer and try and bundle those picks or Claxton or Cam Johnson and somehow try and get in the top 10, top 11, top 12. Like if you know that you have those two big men sitting there at 8, both with very high ceilings at that, maybe you use your flexibility in that scenario and you take that shot with Ace and see if you could get if yours is still there at 10, maybe you're trying to get him there. But I don't again it's all hypothetical. So it's very, very difficult for me to assess. But I'm gonna say Ace. That's gonna be my last word. Colin, over
I
to you.
love how greedy we are. We're talking about all these guys who are like projected, just like we're not talking about like Colin Murray Boyles. Nah, nothing, none of that. We're all into the super. Let's go like 2 picks just ahead.
We gotta have some fun,
Trade.
man.
No, you're right. I'm not
So
criticizing. I'm saying this is what we have to do because we just watched like not good basketball for how many months in a row. It's funny.
But
Every fan does that.
let me sort of pitch you guys as well on an idea because I think Pooch, you're onto something about like you can kind of take a flyer, be that at 8 or a little bit later, and live with that if you're the Nets. So what if you do pick Ace at 8 and then you have 26, 27, and 36? I think that in the mid 20s, similar to how I think Colin, you mentioned that 3 to 10 was sort of like a tricky tier in the draft. I think that right after the lottery, like 15 to 25 is also going to be pretty tricky. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Nets, had a particular target in mind and they were able to use some draft assets, not necessarily just this year's, but over the next few seasons, to kind of really pick and choose and target somebody that they specifically want later on.
yeah.
Yeah. If
And
it's a high enough pick, I've long thought that Cam Johnson, this is the time to unload that because I think he is
Yeah.
the exact kind of like player where like teams when they lose in the playoffs, they always think we need like he's the kind of guy I feel like contending teams will look at and say Cam Johnson could like get us over the hump. Where like you're not gonna unload a ton to like get him because he's not like a superstar, but he's a high end role player. So I think that could be something where you find a team who is in those late teens, meaning like they're kind of like a fringe team, and they want to like reach that next level. That's when you unload Cam Johnson and you make that pick.
yeah. There are 3 I'm looking at right now, and 2 are right behind them. I mean, you have the Raptors who might wanna dump salary, and the Nets are right there for that. You have, Houston at 10, who's reportedly looking to acquire some type of superstar, and if that's the case, then maybe there's something along the ways that it works out. Again, this offseason runs through Brooklyn. So 9 and 10, I wouldn't even say it's necessarily, like, the craziest thing to think about that they can get there. And there were reports that the Nets wanted to trade for a second pick in the top 10. But again, all hypothetical. Then I'm looking at number 14, and you see San Antonio's there again. Um, they have the number 2 pick. I don't know if they're going to trade it or not, but they're in win now right now, and if they get that number 2 guy to develop to put into their system, maybe help win now. Do they really need that 14th pick? Can you, if you're the Nets, can you package salary? Get rid of Claxton or get rid of Cam Johnson and help a team like that accelerate their build while also acquiring their 14th pick. It's interesting to kind of look and see the teams around the Nets after. I know everybody's looking at ahead, but what about after and bundling that and helping them achieve whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. If it's salary dumping, if it's win now in trades, if it's both. Um, I think again the Nets have so much flexibility and power in this offseason that we have no idea what's to come. And I do think that they're going to try and get a second pick in the top 10, but that's just me.
I think something interesting that I'm sort of, wondering about as well is the Spurs timeline, right? Because a lot has already sort of been made about does Dylan Harper really fit with the guys that they already have? And I think yes, for me, if anything, I'm sort of lower on Stephon Castle maybe than a lot of other people, but I think that Dylan would fit. I do think though that the Spurs are definitely trying to compete for a championship sooner rather than later. So at a certain point, it's like how many rookies can you draft or how many guys can you develop at once in a way that is actually realistic and doesn't conflict with contending for a championship. So I think that's going to be a very careful dance that the Spurs are going to have to do, especially around Wemby. I personally haven't been, very sold so far on how they've built, the roster around him, but it's still very early on in his career and, in their trajectory together. But I'm with you. I think that the Spurs are a big team to watch.
Yeah. I mean, the lottery really set us up for all this where you have these teams that maybe they're not like there yet where they're title contenders, but they're not quite like the Nets where this is step one. You got these teams that are on like step 5 or 6, and they're in the position where it's like, all right, I don't want to call like taking Dylan Harper like a step back, but like it kind of is if, he's on your roster now and like a year ago, like I don't think anyone thought they were going to go win a championship with Chris Paul, but like that's like a move where it's more of like a win now move when they brought him on a year ago. It's the same thing with Dallas. It's really the same. You mentioned it with Philly earlier. Like they're really not supposed to be here right now with Joel Embiid, and who knows what's going to happen with Paul George, and that contract having a trade kicker is like maybe the worst, like the biggest problem in like all of the NBA. I feel like because it's one thing to just eat that contract on its own, but the trade kicker, woof, that's the thing that's pulled me back from thinking about the Nets taking that on to jump to 3. I would not do that. That contract's a monster with horns growing out of its head. But I digress. All right, should we do some draft picks? Sound good, Pooch?
Colin's got another fun game for us. These usually are pretty fun, Colin. I had fun with the uniform one. We had I forgot
The draft, the one we did with Eric, I very much enjoyed because the amount of characters that were in it. We did a snake draft of trade deadline acquisitions right around the deadline last year. That was a lot of recent guys, clearly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so today with the draft coming up, I thought it'd be a good idea, fun idea. We could snake draft all-time Brooklyn Nets first-round draft picks. Sent a couple over in the document to you guys earlier to check out, so hopefully you got a memory bank. But Wilko, you're the guest today, so
I'm going to post them in the chat there, Wilko and Colin.
Yeah, it's an interesting pool of guys. As we know, the Nets have not had a lot of high-end first-round picks, not a lot of first-round picks to begin with. But you got the first pick, pal. You're the guest, so take it away whenever you're ready.
Well, appreciate you giving me the first pick, I should say. It was tough. It was a little tough, actually. I actually I was looking at the names earlier this morning, and I was kind of having to rack my mind a little bit, because like you're saying, there aren't too many of them, and the differences aren't that big sometimes. But with the first pick, maybe a little controversial because of a couple other names who are also on here, but I'll go with Brook Lopez, 9 seasons on the team, multiple seasons averaging 20 plus, all-star. I think even outside of the Nets, you look at everything that he has done in the NBA and just, as a basketball player as a whole. kind of tough to argue with what he's done. And then I'll say that what sort of put him a little bit over the edge versus some of the older names who are arguably more accomplished, especially, with the Nets. I'll just say that, having watched Brook Lopez live and throughout his career, I just felt a little more comfortable.
It's the all-time leading scorer. It's not a bad pick at all.
No.
Which you
Colin?
want to go? All right.
Got it.
All right. I'm gonna take Buck Williams. I feel like that's just the value pick here. His jersey's hanging from Barclays Center. That's who we got to roll with here. I'm sure. I think I know who Pooch is going to take next. There's a little bit of a cliff after this guy.
You took me. You took my pick there. I was hoping, like the Nets,
Always. You got the next two because it's a snake.
I got the next two. I'm going.
Yeah.
Kenyon Martin. I'm going Kenyon Martin back to back with Bernard King. Going to be a big team. We're going Malawash and Ace Bailey.
All right. I'm gonna do this shout out Syracuse, Derek Coleman. His son played at Syracuse a couple years back too, before I got there. But they had a good run with DeJuan Coleman was his kid. But yeah, I got Derek.
I'll go with Kerry Kittles, couple finals runs, how long was he with the Nets? 6, 7 seasons, something like that. Top 5, I want to say, still in 3-pointers. I think in steals as well. So, someone who was with the franchise for a long time, played winning basketball, affected winning. I'll go with him.
Yeah, Kittles was kind of ahead of his time with the shooting and the it being a wings league now. It's back to me, or do you take?
Is it me or back to you, Colin?
Yeah, no, go. You got it because it's snake.
I got it. Oh, yeah.
That's how it works, right?
I'll go.
Yeah.
I'll go with Jarrett Allen here. Even though his Nets career probably didn't last as long as it could have, I value him a little bit more over someone, like Cam Thomas, just because I think that he did a little bit more in the playoffs, and then kind of going back to that idea of the NBA as a whole, I sort of just feel like he's proven more as a player up to this point. So, Jarrett Allen.
Jay's a good pick. He's one of my favorite just like people in the NBA. Like I don't know him, but I know he's like really smart. I think he like builds computers like in his free time. And like every time I still like follow him on Instagram. And I feel like Instagram will show you, sometimes it'll say like liked by, and like that dude just likes the same stupid weird memes that I like on Instagram. I always get a kick out of it when I'm like doom scrolling late at night and I see liked by _Big J or whatever his handle is.
Yeah. Jay is
I'm gonna go.
Seriously. Oh, you got it. You going again?
No. Go. Where are you gonna say?
With J.A., like knowing him personally and having gotten close over the years during his Nets years, particularly, like just like to throw this in, he is genuinely like one of the nicest people that you meet. You would never ever think, aside from his height, that he's a basketball player, like a professional basketball player. Like everything that you see on Twitter and just like who he is in these like press conferences and everything, like he's like such a solid dude. He'd be before Nets games, like I'd go in the locker room, whatever, and he would just have his long legs on on a stool. He'd be sitting in his locker, and he'd just be like scrolling through like video game stuff and like lighthearted movies. Like he was just so I could see why pundits were like he didn't love the game or like he doesn't have that like ferocious energy about basketball, but it's because he's just like a normal guy like the rest of us. Like he just doesn't. He would say to me like, of course I love the game. Like I play it. Like I'm good at it. Like I this is what I've done my whole life. But outside of basketball, I really appreciate my free time, my that now it's his fiance, and his video games and building computers, like doing a lot of tech stuff and what we would call nerdy things. Like it kind of just reminded me of like another guy that you'd come and hang out with, and that made him so likable in a sense. Like everything that leading up to that draft that was against him ended up being, in my opinion, one of his strengths was that he did have a calm demeanor, that he was a very likable guy. He wasn't an ego. He just wants to play basketball and go home. And Brooke Lopez was very similar. So just a little intel on your boy Jared Allen over there. He is really genuinely like one of the nicest people in the world. At the time my dad was sick and he would come up to me like a lot of those guys in that locker room and check on me and say, "How you doing? How's your father doing?" I said a prayer for him, et cetera, et cetera. Seriously a solid human being and a very good basketball player, obviously. So
Yeah, good
when you
pick.
see him liking the same tweets and memes and things like that, it's genuine. So
I bet. I'm happy to hear it. I'm actually kind of glad he fell to me. I'm gonna take Cam Thomas just because I feel like I know we're not doing fives, but let's get a recent guy in there. I love watching Cam play. I don't care how much when you put down your analytics goggles for a moment and don't stress yourself out with his passing and his vision and his defense, which got better, but probably I'm sure he'd agree even still needs a bit of work. He is just fun as hell to watch. So gladly taking Cam Thomas here in round 3.
yep.
The Brooklyn bucket, I like to call him.
Keep taking my picks, man. I'm sick of this shit.
I said you go first, and
I'm sick of
you were
this
like,
shit.
no, you got it.
All right. I'm going. It's tough. They have not drafted very well.
No. I didn't include. All right, I'll throw you a bone here. I did not include guys that they traded for like immediately, like on draft night.
Like the Karis LeVerts
allow
of
it.
the world.
Yeah.
Like the Karises. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And if you look at this, they've really gone with a lot of big men. Like outside of
Yeah.
Kerry Kittles, Cam Thomas, Dwayne Washington. I don't know, right? Like Buck is like he's still a big man, kind of like. Uh I'm just gonna say Derek Favors, and it doesn't lead to Darren Williams.
It's altering the timeline. All right.
Is it me again?
How many picks is that for you? So this is our last swing back. I
I
was gonna have us do 5 rounds, and I was like, there's just not enough. Like,
all right. For the sake of having Jordy Fernandez as my coach, Noah Clowney will be my pick.
good stretch 4. Noah Clowney of the future, maybe. Then it'll turn into even more so. We'll talk about his ceiling, I'm sure, a ton in the off season. I'm gonna go with Dwayne Washington, RIP, another Syracuse guy. It didn't pan out in the NBA as much, but he was fantastic with the Orange. So why the hell not? I'm gonna close with him. I needed, even though we're not doing 5s and we're only doing 4s, I needed some more ball handling with Buck and who else did I have down low? Between him and CT, that would be an absolute show in the backcourt. So between him and Buck and Collin, yeah. All right.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I just gotta bank on beating you guys through size. Just getting every board. I'll go with Mason Plumlee here. Didn't really do too much with the Nets, but I think that respectable for a late first round pick. Best days came after leaving Brooklyn, but I'll go with him and cap things off there.
I'm very impressed that he's still in the NBA, being kind of an undersized, non-shooting big to survive as long as he has, even if it's on veteran minimum contracts. Like, he's a success story for sure, I think.
Yeah, definitely. His passing is fun always. He ends up getting a few highlights a year that kind of end up being fun.
There's one clip of him. I think he might have been on I don't even know if he was a Piston or maybe he was playing the Pistons where he did like a fake like throw ahead or like kept the ball there and like threw his hand forward and then like picked it back up and faked the guy out and like yammed it. I laugh every time I see it. It's like kind of like a sham god, but without moving. Plum Dog Millionaire. All right. So anyone listening listen to the pod after the fact, let us know who you guys think won this draft. We'll get back to you.
Teams are Team Pooch is Kenyon Martin, Bernard King, Derek Favors, Noah Clowney. We got Wilko with Brooke Lopez, Kerry Kittles, Jared Allen, and Mason Plumlee. Colin Hellwig has got Buck Williams, Derek Coleman, Cam Thomas, and Dwayne Washington. Good job, fellas. I think Wilko's got us, though.
Definitely with the size.
Yeah, definitely with the size. I don't know about the shooting and the skill.
I mean,
we all know that. We all knew. Go ahead.
No, just J.A. and Mason Plumlee, you could argue they have two of the biggest, most memorable blocks in Nets history. Like Jared Allen's block on LeBron at the rim. He was one of two to do such a thing. And then Plumlee's block on LeBron James actually to win the game as time expired in 2014. If you guys remember that, Bron was going nuts. The Nets swept the Heat in the regular season just to lose in 5 in the postseason. But Mason Plumlee was a freaking legend that year.
Yes. Wilko's team is King James's worst nightmare.
Yeah. So I'm gonna shift this quick. We're running low on time here, boys. But I from what I've gathered and understood is that the Nets there's a good chance that they keep all 5 picks. You know, it's one of those scenarios where the thinking might be we have 5 shots at finding a diamond in the rough. We have a shot at keeping this rookie group together and developing under Jordy from year 1 till however long it takes. Wilko, I know Colin wanted to ask you this, but is there a pick that's perfect for the Nets that we should be paying more attention to, or maybe we're not talking enough about?
I like a couple guys for the Nets, so I'll give you guys 2 names. One being a guard, one being a big. So I think with the bigs, I think Hansen Yang from China would be really interesting for a few reasons. I think that just to be totally, transparent at first, I mean, Joe Tsai himself has come out in the past and, directly said that if there is, a Chinese athlete or a Chinese basketball player who wants to play in America, that he'll kind of do everything that he can to help them. In fact, he dishes out scholarships, I believe, to 10 Chinese athletes a year or something like that already. So clearly, it's a mission that's pretty close to him. Even beyond that, though, once we get past that, I think that the fit on the court makes a lot of sense. He's someone who can play in the pick and roll, play finishing, rolling hard to the rim. Not, the most explosive athlete, but he's 7'1", so big body, really coordinated, soft touch at the basket. And then I really think that, if we're looking at the bigs in this draft, he's right up there with Derek Queen when it comes to passing. I think that Derek Queen is a much better, driver, and he's probably slightly more athletic in a way. He's a lot more like probably explosive or twitchy might be the best word to describe it. But, on defense, he has huge questions, and Hansen Yang does as well. With a pick in the 20s, I really feel like, it's that flyer that we mentioned earlier. Why not go for a big who is, I think he's going to turn 20 the second night of the draft, if I'm not mistaken. He's been dominating in China for 2 years, which I understand isn't the highest level of competition, but he's being doubled and tripled every single night by, guys who either have been in the NBA or who are well-traveled pros, so they clearly know the game of basketball. He plays a tough schedule. I think that he went to the NBA draft combine and he more than held his own, both, with the testing and in the scrimmages. So I think he would be interesting. And for Jordi Fernandez, he loves his bigs who can play around the elbows, who can make some passes, who can make some reads, who are unselfish and who will be productive. out of, many different spots on the court. I really feel like Hansen Yang can fit that. And then with the guards, real quick, Jace Richardson would be interesting, I think. Um, he's a little bit small, which I guess would be the main concern, but sort of thinking about how malleable the Nets' roster situation is, I feel like he's a guy who late in the draft, if he kind of falls a little bit, even at number 19, he could be the best player available there. And he has a skill set that, is going to fit next to either a star point guard, a star center, a star wing. He could maybe even be like a sixth man off the bench. So he has a pretty wide range of outcomes that I think are helpful, but that I'm pretty comfortable with.
Yeah, I think Jace was, if I have it right, he was north of 40% from three last year. And I'm always impressed when a guy at the college level can do that. And we know Jordy likes the three ball, so I'm a fan of his too.
I got
What's up,
nothing.
Pooch?
Just a bravo for Wilko. I mean, coming on the
That's
show,
what we
dropping
need.
insights that we needed. Wilko, thank you so much for hopping on, and thank you so much for dissecting the draft. I know it's not the easiest, like with all the moving parts and hypotheticals, but you're on the money today. So where can the good folks of the Brooklyn Pod find you in Nets world if they don't already follow you?
Yeah, well, first of all, guys, really appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun. And then for everyone else, you guys can find me on Twitter or X at WilkoMCV, WILKOMCV. You can find all my NBA draft content on YouTube at Floor and Ceiling. Also on Substack, floorandceiling.substack.com. All of those links will be in my various bios across all of these websites. But yeah, again, thanks a lot, guys, for having me on. And as I said at the top of the show, I really think that a lot can still happen before the draft. So I really think that even just the next few days could probably give us, a lot more to talk about.
Well, folks, you heard the man. Go follow him if you don't already. Wilko, we thank you again. It was a really fun episode. Thanks to everybody who listens and supports the Brooklyn Podcast. We appreciate you. If you ever want to reach out, we're at The Brooklyn Pod on X, at The Brooklyn Pod on Instagram, at The Brooklyn Pod on TikTok. And if you want to email us, we're at thebrooklynpod@gmail.com. So, as always, it's been real. It's been nice. In other words, it's been real nice. Wilko, thanks again. Everybody, take care.